Welcome, everyone. Today, we are joined by the CEO of the Dabba Network, Karam. Karam, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, I am excited as well. This is an interview I've been looking forward to for some time. Love what you guys are doing. Obviously, with the connections you have from your past history, as well as the market you're moving into, that's uniquely positioned. And then you guys, the way you're doing your deployment strategy and matching supply and demand, I think is something we haven't yet seen with other projects. And of course, we're going to dig into all those details. But before we get into all that, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and give us your background and the things you were doing leading up to the Dabba Network.
For sure. My name's Karam. I'm one of the co-founders of Dabba. I'm the CEO, but also the CTA, more the technology person. There's another co-founder, Shubhendu. Shubs handles most of the operations and business side. Shubes and I have actually been working together for about almost 15 years now. We were working together for 7 years before we started Dabba. We actually used to run a company that built logistics for software, software for logistics. And it was actually a very sort of special high value area where the companies that we built the software for, they would only transport high value items like cash, gold, diamonds, human organs, that sort of thing. And it was amazing because you have these companies that you don't really notice, but are moving tens of billions of dollars worth of goods sort of all over the place. And it's exactly like movies, armored cars, armored guns, that sort of thing. And it's the kind of business where, there's no such thing as a lost parcel. And so we spent 7 years building the software that powered all of these sorts of things. And that's actually where we sort of learned the problem of connectivity, because our fundamental business was trying to connect and track and move all these pieces together. And then that sort of really naturally led us into Dabba. So we sold that company and the entire team to our biggest client because it powered that entire business. And we launched into Dabba and said, this is a problem that we've really got to solve.
That's amazing. I'd imagine that there's a high demand for moving gold and not losing it today with the way the gold prices have gone. So how did you, it's once you sold off that business, my understanding is that you were an ISP for a period of time, correct?
So it was actually a very natural progression. So two things sort of coincided. Since we were doing all of this work for logistics, one of the things that we had to do was we needed to track all of these armored vehicles that were, thousands of them that are on their routes all the time. And we found that connectivity was a huge problem in sort of being able to track those things. And even when they stopped a given location, sort of getting updates was difficult. The second and sort of more thing that hit us as a team more directly was all 10, 12 of us every single day had this ritual of where at about 5 p.m. we would all go to the local tea stall near our office, stand around, and that's where you have your stand-up meeting and the rest of that. And because I mentioned, our software-powered critical logistics, the entire team is on call all the time, right? 24 hours a day to any client, whole team's available. And so we often found that when we would have these meetings at these chai stalls and like our little ritual, people would end up carrying their laptops and you'd want connectivity. So we said, okay, you know what? Let's just plonk a broadband connection into the store and use the Wi-Fi. Pretty soon other customers wanted to do it. So we were like, okay, this thing better pay for itself. So let's do this system where let people pay a really small amount, but they got to pay for it so that the service is sustainable. And there was this really sort of sweet little social thing where in India, when you go and buy like tea or biscuits or whatever at this tiny stall, a lot of the times, we use digital payments now, but back then it was cash. They would give you a small biscuit or a chocolate or something, instead of 1 rupee or 2 rupees back, because it was just too much of a hassle. So instead, they started giving out Wi-Fi vouchers. Pretty much, 20, 30 people a day were using Wi-Fi at the tea stall. And then the rest of the street would notice that, hey, this stall's got this Wi-Fi, it's doing great for business. Everyone wanted it. And so we just sort of had this natural progression where we started building out more and more, and we built very organically.
That's an incredible story. I love that. And the name Dabba, right? That kind of coincides with that story to an extent, right?
Yeah, there's two sort of connotations to it. The first is, so Dabba is a very sort of generic, it's a word in Hindi that basically means box. And so it's a Wi-Fi router and a Wi-Fi box. But Dabba also has a second meaning colloquially where it's like it just about works, right? So it's cheap and accessible, right? And so in these low cost locations, these micro retailers, we also wanted to set expectations with customers of this is the cheap and fast service, right? So people know what they're paying for and they know what the quality of level of what they're getting. So that name sort of fit really naturally, and that's what we run with.
I love the natural progression though, and how you didn't necessarily fall into. You put yourself in position for this to happen, and then now here we are with the Dabba network. So, would love for you to give us a high level overview of what you're looking to achieve with Dabba.
Yeah, so basically what we discovered after rolling out more than 1,000 micro retailers like at commercial locations these days, our original plan was really built around the idea of we will use whatever local ISP is available and we'll just do the top layer of the hardware and software and that sort of thing. The more we scaled, the more we realized that the underlying infrastructure of broadband itself and distribution didn't really exist in India. And we were hitting capacity limits very, very quickly with all of our partners. And that's when we sort of really looked into things and we found that although India is this insane telecom market, right? We're the second largest telecom market in the world with 800 million mobile subscribers, like 4G and 5G. Indians are the highest consumers of data in the world. The average Indian does something like 30 to 40 gigabytes a month just on their phone. And most people have dual SIMs on their phone so that, they can have two plans and consume data. The rate at which data consumption is growing is mad. It's grown by about 2 or 3x in the last 3 years and will roughly double. Like today was a very interesting statistic actually, where one of our about 30% of our network, their consumption level has grown almost doubled in the last 4 months alone.
Oh wow.
Like the rate at which people are consuming data is crazy. But the level of connectivity is absolute garbage. Less than 5% of Indians have access to broadband and Wi-Fi. To give you a sense of numbers and scale and what that means, the US has about 120, 130 million broadband connections. China has about 650 million. India has all of 40 million. So there's a long way to go. And there are two reasons for this, right? So the first is India skipped a development step. We went straight from landlines to 5G, right? We nothing in between. We never built out these broadband networks. And the second thing is broadband networks are incredibly expensive and time consuming to install and require regulations and a whole bunch of things. So this market seems like it's ripe for disruption. And we think that DePIN is the way to do it. And the results have been really effective so far. We sold more than 12,000 hotspots. I can get into the details, but the broad idea is emerging markets like India, Africa, and that sort of thing have difficulty with physical infrastructure because it's either too expensive and too time consuming. But there are markets like wireless where there's an insane level of demand and people's willingness to pay for it. And DePIN is the best way to organize all the stakeholders it requires to fulfill that demand.
Okay, I want to dig more in on the Indian market because 1.4 billion people, correct, in the population around there. So massive population, young population too. I don't know the exact metrics. I think it's something like 70% are under the age of 35, somewhere in that range. Is that correct?
Yes, that's where we are. We're an incredibly populous, incredibly young country.
So you referred to it as like a greenfield market, right? Because it is virtually untapped. I mean, you said what 5% of people have broadband, and then what was the metric you said? Like 50 to 60% are on mobile networks today.
Yeah, roughly about 800 million people.
Okay.
So yeah, close to about 60% ish.
So what's holding them back? I mean, I believe like the telecoms are expanding as quickly as they can, right? And they're just having trouble keeping up, I guess. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, so there are two things. The first is the scale of the problem is massive, right? Because hundreds of millions of internet connections need to be rolled out.
Yeah.
The second thing is because telecoms were the first generation of connectivity, it's infinitely easier to install tens of thousands of mobile towers because you only need that many versus digging up the roads, getting local permission, laying fiber optical cable under the ground, and the rest of that. So the telcos got sort of low-hanging fruit that way. And the scale of the market is massive, right? They're going to get 1 billion customers. It's a great business to be in. So number one, that low-hanging fruit was taken by the telcos. The second thing is, so the Indian market is this unique snowflake compared to the rest of the world, where although we have two large telcos, they only control 50% of the broadband market. The remaining 50% is controlled by what are called local cable operators. So there are 150,000 tiny local cable operators. Think a guy in, from 25 to 45-ish with some technical knowledge in a small town or like even the outskirts of a tier 2 city. And he's got a satellite dish TV pointed at the sky and is serving his neighborhood of a couple of hundred people or a couple of thousand people, right? This is the backbone with which cable and satellite TV is delivered in India. And all of these guys are migrating to becoming internet service providers because, as mentioned, mobile fueled the Indian customers' appetite for data, and COVID just threw fire on that, right? And so all customers are cutting the cord. Everyone wants to start streaming. So they're in the process of this. So what we're doing is aggregating all of these local cable providers in the same way that Uber did it for transport, Airbnb did it. This is a great playbook because you get economies of scale, you can provide better technology, and you can really accelerate the growth of the network. Now, the reason that telcos will forever have a hard time is also in a country like India, each neighborhood by neighborhood is governed by a different political party or local councillor or cable operator who has pretty much a stranglehold on that network. So even if you're a large telecom, you can't go, you're never going to have that level of ability to align that many people. So it is, in a way, a market that is forever going to be fragmented. And so that allows the best ground possible for something like DePIN, because inherently, structurally, the market itself is decentralized. And so the DePIN rails and the crypto rails will just turbocharge this market. So India as a market has this unique set of conditions where you have the conditions required for decentralization, you have the right amount of demand, you have customers' willingness to pay for it, and the right timing to sort of execute this in a large enough space.
It seems like everything is coming together at the perfect time for you all. And I want to touch a little bit more on the infrastructure side, because the Indian government has kind of been leading the charge there for the better part of 30 years or so, right? And my understanding is that you have fiber optics coming in on the ocean on both sides, and then you have infrastructure built under most of the highways and railroads, but it's that, that middle to last mile that is the problem, right? And getting it into these towns and cities. Is that correct?
Yes, you nailed it. We've got really good fiber under our national highways, under our railway system. We've got excellent connectivity on both coasts. But the moment it hits the edge of the city, that, as you exactly mentioned, middle mile, and we've got really good solutions about that, which we can talk about in a little bit. But that middle mile and that last mile is where the optimization is needed. And that is the area that Dabba is going to contribute to the most, because that's the role that the LCO plays, to connect those customers in that specific area.
Okay, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I want to talk about the history and how that's going to help you out with building out this infrastructure, because you'll have worked with the Indian government to draft the telecom policy, correct? So I'm curious, how that relationship with the government, opened things up for you, and then also helped you establish relationships with some of these LCOs as well.
Yes, absolutely. One of the remarkable things in India is the government actually has an incredibly far-sighted and benevolent view on the expansion of connectivity in the country. Like the government genuinely has this perspective of data is the next oil, and the more Indians you bring online, the better, because everybody has lived through the giant improvement in GDP and life experience in the last 5 years as the mobile boom happened. So everybody's aligned. So the government has done this extraordinary thing, which I think is pretty much unique in most of the world, if not the entire world, where by default, anyone with an internet connection can reshare connectivity without any licensing requirements. They can resell data, they can make money off of it, and they don't have to be an internet service provider or anything along those lines. So what that really allows is that legalizes and flourishes the way that LCOs can operate, and that we can bring in a DePIN model, because the way that our model works is anyone, anywhere in the world can buy a hotspot, which then gets delivered to one of these local cable operators who installs it in their next customer's home or location. We can only do that legally because now you, as the owner of that hotspot and that internet connection that's being subsidized for someone else till it grows out, you're able to legally and regulatory and, more importantly, encouraged by the government to help make that expansion happen. So it's incredible that we have this situation here. And we have a long history of experience in sort of helping out in these large scale things. There are parts of Google public Wi-Fi, for example, that we used to power the infrastructure for it. Would say Google, in fact, it had the oddest name. It had Google Public Dabba Wi-Fi or something like that. It was a very odd name. But we get a chance to power huge parts of different markets in that sense as well. So India also has this regulatory landscape that is not only primed for this sort of growth, but is optimized to incentivize this growth and make it happen even more.
That's incredible. And that's some of the, with other countries, especially in some of the DePIN projects, at least up until this point, there's always been some questions around the regulatory side of things. So having the government on your side is so huge. And then, getting that middle to last mile built out, with the LCOs. And I want to talk more about the LCOs. So you already mentioned it. These are local businesses that were selling satellite TV plans and installing satellite dishes. And I think we've seen this around the world where people are cutting the cord. They want to go into streaming services. And now you're basically giving them a lifeline, if you will, for them to reposition their business and become, part of the Dabba network. And with that, now they can, they can be kind of a sales arm for you in a sense, right? They know their local communities, so they can bring people into the Dabba network and, pivot their business, which is much needed for a lot of them, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And not only pivot their business, but we estimate grow it by a factor of 10x at the very least, right? Because like we talked about, the market is so open that now it's not only about sort of converting their existing network and bringing a set of subscribers onto the Dabba network, but it's about expanding the reach and scale. Because you got to think, these guys are, and I would encourage anyone to check out our YouTube channel or even on the Dabba.network website. There are a couple of videos of of the local cable operators. These are incredibly enterprising local champions who have that inherent entrepreneur DNA and will to make things happen, right? It just so happens that they don't have the kind of access to hardware, software, and capital in an easy fashion for them to really flourish. So by people buying hotspots and participating in this network, they make these local entrepreneurs create a way bigger and way more vibrant market. And what it also does is it establishes what we sort of are starting to think about, and we're talking a little bit about, is what we call a layer zero DePIN, right? Because you have the local cable operators who have on-ground expertise. They're installing Wi-Fi routers in people's homes, offices, and the rest of that. They're bringing connectivity and they're bringing power. They might as well install other devices as well. So we did this really cool partnership with WeatherXM, where we have now installed 800 WeatherXMs across the country. And if you buy one of the Dabba promo bundles that we have that you can check out on Dabba.com, you get a share of those WeatherXM rewards as well. Because ultimately, as DePIN expands in the use cases that it starts to serve, Dabba is building out this on-ground infrastructure and pipeline where we're able to deliver any value that DePIN can create in the world. We will be able to bring that and localize that to India and do it in an open market where the basics are covered and the demand exists. So yeah, we're really excited about this.
I think that's amazing that you all are also working with other projects in the space. I host a Next Space every week, and this came up in our last one. Actually, we were talking about things that we would like to see with DePIN projects moving forward, and one of the things that came up was collaborating with other DePIN projects. And I love the layer zero approach where you guys are the base layer, and you can bring on projects like WeatherXM to connect to your network and other DePIN projects. So, from a contributor standpoint, an investor standpoint that wants to go and buy a hotspot, now they'll have other options they can double down with. Before we get into the contributor side, though, you mentioned you touched on it earlier, some technology about that middle to last mile, and you also mentioned you worked with Google. I believe you guys worked on like Project Loon. Was that what it was called with the lasers?
Yeah, so basically, yeah. So the short version of it was Google had this wild project way before Starlink where they had this idea that, hey, we're going to float these giant balloons high above countries, and we're going to treat those as, cell phone towers instead of installing them on the ground. Uh, I don't know what to say, but I don't know what made them think countries are going to be okay with flying platforms above their airspace run by a foreign company. But obviously, that idea didn't float so far. But one of the cool bits of technology that they had was they used lasers to communicate between the balloons and transfer data. So they were trying to figure out a way to bring that down on Earth and sort of use that to fill in gaps of for telcos, right? Let's say you're a telco and you're in a city, in a beautiful city like London or something, and now you have the River Thames in between, right? You can't make your network go around the country and connect the other half of the city. You got to cross the Thames. You got to do it in multiple points, multiple ways, all of that. So Google was like, yeah, let's do this laser, and it's going to connect these 2 points, which in theory, cool. But they kind of forgot, I think, a little bit that telcos they're massive in scale, and filling a tiny gap of that few hundred meters in their multi-thousand mile network is like nice to have, right? And the price point that they have it at is sort of okay, geared towards long distance nice things. What we realized was, and we were the largest deployer of Google's lasers, actually, if I'm not mistaken. And what we realized is you want a low-cost version, actually, of a poor man's version of Starlink. You want to take those two ideas of Starlink and what Google had with the laser and sort of smash them together. Because what you want to do is on rooftops across the city, you want to build a core laser network that sort of provides the middle mile connectivity, connects neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood, sort of major points. From each one of those lasers, you want to drop fiber optical cable and bring it to the customer's home, office, and that sort of thing. Now we're running these lasers at the moment. We sort of built our own from scratch. I think there are only 3 or 4 companies in the world that have this sort of laser, and I think we're cheaper by a factor of 10x, if not more, than anyone else's, because we've optimized it for the use case that it's actually going to pay for, rather than this cool bit of tech that's sort of generally available. The lasers do things that were not possible before. So the first thing is, what this does is allows you to get a core grid of connectivity over a city in a matter of weeks with a team of less than 10 people. This is ridiculous and unheard of because, currently, if you want to lay a ring of fiber under a city, that's multi-$100 million, multi-year sort of process. So we're bringing that cost down dramatically with the same level of reliability. We've been running these lasers for 3-4 years now. So we know that we have greater than 99% uptime.
Wow.
And that sort of thing. So we know we've nailed that reliability. The second thing that this does is it's taken state of the art of wireless point-to-point communication. Like you could connect 2 Wi-Fi radios technically far apart and sort of do a wireless. That's how people do stuff right now. Those max out at maybe 600 Mbps, maybe a gigabit, best case, all of that sort of thing. Our lasers go up to 10 gigabits, and they're cheaper than the Wi-Fi units. So we think that this is going to be a massive breakthrough. We hope to do like a Mr. Beast style video or that sort of thing in some sense, where we go to this town of a couple of 100,000 people, and in a matter of a week, we're able to deliver like 50,000 people gigabit internet access, at a ridiculously low cost. So we're building up to this. So yeah, we have this laser solution that we think is going to make a giant impact when it comes to connectivity, both in emerging and developed markets as well.
That is remarkable. So kind of putting my head around this. So for the LCOs, especially in towns or cities where the ISPs haven't built out the infrastructure, if you equip them with these lasers, I mean, they're going to be the only game in town, right? I mean, they're going to be able to come in there. And as you mentioned, a crew of 10 people can really get these things set up pretty quickly and get coverage in that area. I mean, that is huge. What about the areas that you're tackling today that there are other, large ISPs I guess with these LCOs, if they team up with you, I would imagine you guys, because you're going to be a bigger entity, could probably get better wholesale rates that funnel through to them and make them more competitive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that we provide in terms of the Dabba network provides in terms of support to the LCO, right? So the first thing that they get is the Wi-Fi hotspot, because that for an LCO, every incremental new customer is also an expensive affair from a working capital perspective, because he's got to buy a Wi-Fi hotspot. He's got to have enough fiber optical cable to go from the nearest switch to the customer's house. Got to pay for the labor, got to do all of that, right? So when you're buying a hotspot, you're essentially subsidizing that. So that's one bit of support that we bring. The second is the LCO does not have uh, what you would call modern tooling and modern software to manage his operations team, right? So he has 3 or 4 guys working for him. He doesn't have an app right now that says, Dave, Jack, and Joey reported into work. They've got 3 things to do today. This is their turnaround time, that sort of stuff, right? So now we give him this. So now he actually knows what his team is up to. The app also tells him, yeah, man, you got 20 customers that bill is due tomorrow, and it shows him the last incoming payments and shows him so this sort of basic tooling that you would expect in 2025, he doesn't have. So we provide it to them. The third thing that we bring to the table is also exactly as you nailed down. Because we're operating this at scale, we're able to provide them that backhaul at a much cheaper level. And that has a giant downstream impact on the speeds and the prices that they're able to deliver to customers. The last thing that we bring them is basic on-ground marketing support as well. Basically, of the $2.99 that you paid for your hotspot, about $10 to $20 is used as direct marketing for that LCO to help them grow more customers. So now they get a standardized marketing plan and execution ability to do over the next 6 months, where first you're going to do flyers, then you're going to do these billboards, then here's this little mini truck that you've rented. Here are your Instagram posts. Here's the all of that, right? So we bring this entire we try to think of this because we got funded by YC. We were lucky enough to raise money from them early on. And we saw the value of bringing training and standardized playbook to high functioning people. So you bring local entrepreneurs who want to make a change, process and support and a way to do this and give them a sense of cohort and all of that. And man, these guys are going to 10 to 100x the size of their networks.
That is incredible. So not only are you giving them a way to pivot their business, but you're helping them with marketing. You're helping them modernize their tools of their business. And I mean, they're going to be able to, with the capital investment through DePIN, right? It's going to help them expand their network in ways they couldn't before. I mean, they have to be banging on your door right now, wanting to join the network. Do you guys have a pretty extensive wait list of these LCOs right now?
Oh, yeah, we have a really long wait list for 2 reasons. One is, yes, we are offering a very compelling solution to them at the moment. The second is because we've had such good relationships with the government and we help do Google Wi-Fi and our own microteal, we've known most of the LCOs for the last while. Like, we have been in LCO, we've lived their lives. We know exactly the pains that they have. So yeah, we've got a line out the door for sure.
Love that. And for the LCO, right? So they get a percentage of the token rewards for installing and maintaining as well. The other part of that, and I have a question around, is the quality control. So, how are you vetting these LCOs? How are you deciding which ones to bring into the network? And then how are you balancing that with the other side of the equation, which is people buying hotspots, right?
Yeah, great question. So there are multiple levels in which there are both social and practical sort of safeguards built in so that things perform as well as they should. The first is all of our LCOs come through a referral system of where either we know the first 30 directly or they're referred by somebody that they know. So there's that. The second thing that happens is all fiat payments that the customer makes is collected by the Dabba portal. So payments come to us before they get paid out to LCOs in any way, shape, or form, right? So revenues flows through us first. So it's a very strong incentive to sort of thing. The third thing is you as the hotspot owner, you receive all of the rewards first, and then you redistributed them on a prepaid or sort of auto basis to the LCO so long as they perform. If their uptime metrics, which are publicly available and transparent to everybody, are not as high as that they should be, the hotspot owner or the system will automatically cut off that LCO and your hotspot will get reassigned. So we have multiple sort of layers like this in place. The second thing worth mentioning is sort of broad social context is because of the rise of Amazon and quick commerce and all of these sorts of things, every young man in this country knows that their life is led by an app and what the rules are and how their paycheck comes and the rest of that. So both the LCOs and their operational teams are sort of used to this idea of this is the structure and this is how a quality level of business is done. So that culture is also coming into place.
Okay. Okay. And speaking of the hotspots at this point, well, I don't want to dox myself. I think I have like 30 or 35 myself. But it looks like you guys have up to over 12,000. And, this is really interesting. When I put out the overview video maybe 2 months ago, you guys were still halfway through season 2. And then like all of a sudden there's like a flip switched and all of these pre-orders just came in and drove. So obviously you guys have picked up, I mean, you see the chart here. Yeah, you picked up a lot of demand here. So how are you now balancing that with LCOs and then their customer base? Because one of the big things I want to call out here, and this is really important, versus other networks, and this is where I think you've made such an improvement, aside from everything else we've already talked about, but matching supply and demand. And this is a problem with other networks where generally, if you want to participate in a network, you buy the hardware. You're responsible for finding the location and the install and maintenance. And obviously, there's some things, some downside to that, right? Number one, you end up with having installs in places where you have no demand from the customers, right? Or you have oversaturation in certain areas. Not to mention, they're probably not optimizing setups every time. These people aren't professionals in many cases, and managing uptime and all of that. So I would love for you to speak to the fact that all of your installs are getting usage today, and then really try to understand, moving forward, how are you going to keep that balance in line when you have such a surge in people buying hotspots and you have the LCOs in line waiting? What's your plan of action to make sure that balance stays in place?
Great question. So the first thing I would note is, like in the natural progression of how we've sort of gotten to Dabba and that sort of thing, I just want to sort of refer back to early in our conversation when we talked about like logistics coordination is sort of in our DNA as a company and as a team. So we have lived 15 years of coordinating complex systems in an accountable manner. So when we build stuff, it's just sort of, it's the only way we know how to live in the world. So we'll do that pretty well. The second thing is, I think that people underestimate the level of demand that exists in India, where to define it clearly, at least for us, demand is the end customer who's using the internet and is paying for it, and supply is hotspot owners. At least that's how we think about things. So demand and being able to onboard that demand, we actually think is going to outstrip the number of the speed at which hotspots and supply owners come in. And that's because simply one, the scale of the problem. And the second thing is we actually want to bring a sort of quick commerce, high impact, instantaneous, almost degen like sense of reward when you purchase a hotspot. Where one of the problems that we have with, well, not problems, but I guess one of the limitations with existing DePIN projects is, so you see this cool project, you hit buy on that. It ships to you a month, 2 months, 3 months later, something like that. You spend a day setting it up, maybe it goes well, maybe it doesn't, but whatever. And then, a week later, you start earning rewards, you learn a little of crap. I need to tweak this thing because it's not pointed in the, whatever, right? And then you sort of think, no. We think we can do better, especially given that we've got a lot of demand in a place we can deploy to, where you buy the hotspot and we have deployed a hotspot ahead of you. We have eaten that cost and you get assigned that one immediately and you start earning rewards instantaneously. So our goal over time is to actually make absolutely sure that the demand side grows faster than we can make the supply side go.
That is so huge. And by the way, I'm going to pull this up here. For people, you're running several campaigns right now. So for people that would like to get involved in the project, you have options here. So you've got a bank, you've got a Animica brands. The Dabba community, I think you have to be referred to. So I will in the description put my referral code in there. You got DY Cats, and then you've got the WeatherXM one. So in this one, you get both a WeatherXM station and a hotspot deployed, where you end up earning tokens on both projects. I assume you guys will have more of those types of collaborations in the future. So from the standpoint of someone that, let's say they came on here, they wanted to buy a hotspot, What does that process look like today? So you haven't had your TGE yet, so I think you get Genesis tokens, but what does that process look like today? And then in the future, what will that project look like as far as choosing your LCO and seeing your deployments on your platform?
Yeah, so the process of purchasing a hotspot is really simple. You go to dabba.com, you hit the buy button. If you take a look, the different campaigns that we have offer sort of different rewards that appeal, we have found appeal to different people. I absolutely grant you we could do a better job of presenting that, and we will do that. But take a look at the options that are available and see which one appeals to you, and you can buy the hotspots using either fiat or crypto as well. Now, once you purchase your hotspot, you'll be able to go to the Explorer on Dabba.network, and you can log into the Explorer and sort of see that, yes, your purchase has been made. When the TGE happens, you will then onboard your hotspot, where you come, you choose your LCO, you do your onboarding fee, which is included in the $299 that you pay for, and you get an NFT that proves your ownership of the hotspot. We have designed it so not only that you will be able to pick your LCO, but if we manage to do this, that when we build out more demand ahead of supply, you will be able to pick out the specific hotspot you want as well. So you can support an exact location if you like that, because we'd like to offer as much flexibility and a sense of control as possible. And we found that that's something that people really want. It's a highly requested feature, so we're bringing that to the table. So that's it. It's actually a fairly straightforward process.
Yeah, I have to say again, I put in a pretty substantial order myself, and I had the Genesis tokens coming. One of the big questions on everyone's mind, I'm sure, is when is the TGE going to happen? I don't know if you can, how much info you can give us on that, or maybe a range, a time frame, if you will. What does that look like for you guys right now?
We don't have a specific date that we can announce as yet, but I can tell you that it's pretty soon, and that we will launch on a centralized exchange as well as a DEX. And we have one or two more interesting things that we will do just a little bit ahead of that.
Okay. I like that. So soon, everyone, stay seated. It's coming soon. The other thing I want to ask about is with the token. One of the things you've mentioned in the past is something you've learned from other projects is you want to have plenty of utility around the token once it's launched. And I think that's super important for the viability of the project. So if you could speak to that, what type of token utility have you built around the token once it is launched?
Sure. Well, the Dabba token has a bunch of different utility. I think it's worth focusing on the two core things that really matter. So the first is we have a mint and sort of buyback and burn model, where the end customer who pays for the internet connection and uses the data, we take that fiat currency, we use it to buy the Dabba token, and we use it to burn it, thereby accruing value to the token. And that is also serving as proof of work. Right, so the DBT token, its core utility is to exist and then be burnt when actual usage has happened in the real world. So that's number one. The second is, as I mentioned earlier, the token is used to incentivize, organize, align, and reward all of the different stakeholders required in the ecosystem to make this happen. And to do it in a way that gives the token a sort of firm hand in what's happening. So the clearest way to explain this is, like I mentioned, you as the hotspot owner get 100% of the rewards. Then those tokens are then further redistributed by you to the local cable operator, or maybe one or two other roles like hardware manufacturer, location owner, and small other details like that. This utility absolutely ensures that every party involved does what they are supposed to do in an accountable fashion. It's the best form of utility you could possibly have. So I think while the Dabba token provides utility, and of course you can trade it and do other things like get access to merch, new features, all of that stuff, I think these two core things are the things that matter the most.
I agree. And that is one of the things I look for with any project. And I look at the tokenomics is there utility tied to the token? Okay. There's a lot that are just like strictly governance tokens. I'm like, hey, it should be tied to the business and the revenue coming into the project. So I like what you guys are doing on so many fronts with that. Speaking about the customer side of the equation, how does the pricing compare to the other options? In some cases, they probably don't even have any other options. But if they're looking at other ISPs, how does the pricing compare? And then what kind of usage trends are you seeing? Because you mentioned you're already seeing a huge surge in usage. So curious what the revenue looks like today, and what you think the potential revenue could look like looking forward.
Yeah, great question. So basically, there are three types of customers fundamentally. So the first customer would be in a tier one city like Bangalore, but they have most places, at least the core downtown and the first ring around that, has reasonable options. And in that case, on average, we're 2 to 3x cheaper than whatever any existing services out there because of the DePIN model, because people are helping subsidize it, and we're able to pass on those savings to customers, right? The second set of customers is the people who live on the outskirts of a big city like Bangalore or Delhi or that sort of thing. They have shockingly limited options because telcos really just focus on the core, most profitable downtown areas and that sort of thing. So they have very limited options. And in that case, we're much cheaper and much better than anything that's available out there. And when it comes to tier two and tier three towns, first time they're getting internet connectivity, right? So only game in town, coolest thing ever. We finally have high-speed Wi-Fi, right? So that's the thing. But on average, we are anywhere between 2 to 5x cheaper, and we are anywhere between 10 to 20 times faster. So instead of giving like a crappy 20, 30 Mbps connection, we try to give everybody as close to a gigabit connection as possible.
That's amazing. And so will the plans have tiered status? So like you get certain amount of data, because I imagine, once people have access to Wi-Fi, they're going to start switching over to streaming services. They're going to start buying laptops. They're going to start using more internet. So will there be like tiered plans? So if they want to increase their usage, they'll be paying more and drive more revenue essentially?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So behavior is actually changing. So what used to be the case of, people used to pay like a certain amount for a given data cap, and then, you could recharge for a higher amount if you needed more data or that sort of thing. But what we're starting to see is because the Indian customer understands their appetite is insane, they want unlimited data. Right? They're willing to pay you whatever that price is, obviously as cheap as possible, but they want unlimited data. But now what gets really interesting with the variables that come into play is the speed is one. So they're willing to pay, as long as it's unlimited, they're willing to pay a little bit more, but for a slightly slower connection, for example. The second thing that entices people is OTT packages that we're starting to offer, right? So get a Dabba connection and you get 6 months of Netflix, Hotstar, Prime Video, whatever, right? So you get all of the streaming services bundled in. The two other spectacularly interesting things that we're starting to see is everybody either wants a CCTV camera, security camera in their house, or already has one and wants to be able to remotely access it. So that's why they're getting an insane connection, or they're willing to pay 3 months in advance because we're throwing in a CCTV camera for free. Because we're also looking at, if you have a CCTV camera and a whole network of them pointed outdoors, maybe there's AI training value or something in there at some point as well. So let's see. And it's part of our sort of layer zero of putting in more devices. And the last one that's fun and interesting is low-cost projectors. People love the idea of okay, pay 6 or 7 months and you get this cool projector that also has a battery. So if you're in a tier 3 town and even power goes out, you can still stream and have the match on or whatever. So customer behavior is changing.
There's so many different ways for you to drive revenue, especially with the layer zero approach. You can add on so much. I spent a lot of my career in sales, and we would run promos and things like that, for people signing on. So there's just so many different ways you guys can leverage that. One of the other things I read about was, in the US, we have this, sign on with your login, sign in to different apps, etc. So that's a whole nother layer you can add to the equation, where they can sign into different applications using their Dabba login, the application layer. So I think there's probably a tremendous opportunity there as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are two things that it'll take a little more time to play out, but we think it's going to lead to really interesting things. The first thing that's deeply compelling from LCOs that the Dabba network offers them is all of the routers also form a roaming mesh, right? So if you have a Dabba connection at home, or even if you don't, you will see a publicly available Dabba Wi-Fi signal that anyone can connect to. It's like what you would connect to in an airport, right? But you pay a tiny amount of money. You just pay as you go. You pay 1 cent a gigabyte, basically. And so people love the idea of having a roaming network in their tiny town so that wherever they go, they have connectivity. The second thing is because unlike existing telcos that have they existing telcos are basically resource extraction. They're rent-seeking organizations, right? They pay billions of dollars, get control of the airwaves, and they extract rent from you as the customer. They're not bringing anything to the table apart from I got a lot of money, right? Whereas because we're sort of approaching this from a software developer's perspective, we're building an API and development platform into the Dabba network itself, where developers will start to be able to build applications that can do more interesting things. So all of our routers, for example, are capable of a limited set of multi-mining. So for example, a dev can build a distributed VPN, right, and deploy it to all of the Dabba networks and figure out whatever their tokenomics model is. You can do ad blockers. So each router can run about 2, 3 apps, and we think there are interesting things there. And then, of course, along with payments and identity, like you mentioned, sign in with Dabba and things along those lines. We think that there's a bright future there.
Absolutely, especially with you being the base layer in some of these places that have never had Wi-Fi. I mean, you'll be the base layer for all of their connectivity needs. And you think about this, we don't think about it because we've had access to Wi-Fi has been readily available so much, but it's amazing when you start to think about how much you use that connection for different things and all the things that can be layered on top. I think there's just tremendous potential there. So, I mean, I just say, you have the market to move into, this massive market with a huge need. You have the connections at the government level and the connections at the local level to get it done. And then you obviously have, the customer base. And I think using DePIN to pull it all together is just so interesting. So I am curious, why did you go to the DePIN route? I mean, you could have just brought in investors and done it yourself. So I'm curious, what made you decide to go the more decentralized route and leverage DePIN for all this?
Honestly, it was a very natural progression. So when we were laying out the first set of lasers to sort of test out, can you build a citywide grid? One of the things that we did was divide the city of Bangalore. It's about 625 square kilometers, so it's like 20 by 20 grid or something like that. And we wanted to do this model because as a company, because we did public Wi-Fi and things like that, pretty much every day or every week, somebody in the team would get an email or a call from, a random customer or someone going, "Oh my God, I love what you're doing. Are you coming to my neighborhood? Do you have a franchising model?" Like whatever, right? And awesome, like, yay, thanks public for so much love. We never saw it coming, but we're really happy about it. But when we decided to sort of chop up the city into these grids and we wanted to build that out, we realized, okay, the public seems to love us so much. Let's see if they're willing to put their money where their mouth is, right? In a totally normal fiat way. We had no relation to crypto at this point. It wasn't even on our radar of things. So really quickly, once we got the word out that we were doing this thing, literally within a matter of weeks, we sort of sold each square for $20,000. You could book one for 1,000, and then we said once we sell them out, whatever. Within a week, a couple of 100 people contacted us, and they were like, "Have you heard of this thing called helium? Do you guys know helium? Helium, 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 helium." Right? And at that point, when we finally looked into helium, if so many people are telling you do something, you should. Um, it was so obvious that crap, this is so much a better way to do this because one of the problems that we found ourselves was, yes, people were willing to subsidize the network, but when we look at the administrative costs, the taxation, the regulation, and all of that to do this cross-border using normal fiat rails, it's just pointless. It makes it impossible. But yeah, when we saw Helium, we were like, oh my God. And we were lucky enough to get introduced to the team over there, meet some folks at Multicoin, had a long discussion about, how does this whole thing work? And we realized, like, this is the only it's like gravity, right? This is the only logical way that this is going to happen.
For sure. Helium, they were a huge pioneer in the whole DePIN movement. A lot of people, including myself, that's why we got into the DePIN space in general. So I just love the improvements that you put on. And I think we'll continue to see this, in the way you're matching supply and demand is so unique. And from an investor standpoint, I love it because before when I was installing helium hotspots, I was like getting up on rooftops with installers, maintaining them, finding locations. With this, I'm like, hey, I can just, buy the hotspots so that I can log into my platform and see that it's been installed, that it's being maintained. And I think you're going to see this in more and more, especially emerging countries, where you can now easily source investment from all over the world, kind of removing those guardrails through the traditional finance, system. I think it's going to really help out there. And I would imagine, I mean, do you guys have plans? India is such a huge market. I mean, obviously this should be your number one focus right now. There's endless opportunity there, but do you have plans in the future to move into other existing emerging markets, especially with that laser to laser technology?
For sure. So, like, there are something like I think in all of the emerging markets, like most of the countries in Africa, South America, Indonesia, that sort of thing. I think there's something like 3 billion people who don't have access to high-speed internet in the world. And our focus for the next 12 to 18 months will be India because we know how to execute and we sort of want to refine that playbook. And then we have this notion of, I guess, what we call internet in a box, where we want to be able to send anybody, some entrepreneurial person somewhere in the world, a shipping container that contains Dabba routers, all of the cabling, all of the hardware, and a stack of lasers. And, in a matter of a week or two, they should be able to roll out a network and connect like a couple of thousand people. We think it's going to take us maybe another 12, 18 months at most to really nail that, where it's like IKEA level. All we need is one tiny thing and the whole thing will play out. So our goal, yeah, is to refine this and then absolutely expand to as many markets as possible.
Okay. And with that said, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Obviously, there's no shortage of opportunity, and using DePIN, you can expand pretty quickly. What are your goals? From a numbers standpoint, how many deployments would you like to get to, say, a year from now, and looking forward?
Yeah, so we're optimistic based on the current trajectory that we have, and at least our aim is to grow the network by 10x and have at least 100,000 hotspots deployed and running less than 12 months from today.
Wow. That would be impressive. If anybody could do it, I think you guys can with the way you have everything structured. So excited to see how much, just in the last couple of months, I think people have discovered the project, but I think we're still so early in this. I think there's very bright times ahead. For people that are wanting to learn more about the project, obviously your website, your Discord, and then I know you have a weekly space. Is there any other areas you would recommend for people that want to learn more about the Dabba network?
For sure, yeah. Please, if you're interested, consider reading our Git book. It's available on gitbook.dabba.network. It's, I think, underrated. It actually does a good job of explaining what's happening. I think it's also worth, we don't push it enough, but our YouTube channel has a ton of really interesting videos that are both explainers, and you can see the work we've done at live conferences, actual installations, things along those lines. So I think that's also a great resource. And of course, as you mentioned, please absolutely join our Discord, join us on a space that we do every week on X, or follow us over there. And that's a great place to start learning.
Fantastic. I'll be on the lookout for that Mr. Beast-like video on your YouTube channel when you start deploying those lasers. I think that's going to be super cool. Look, y'all are solving a real world problem. I think there's a lot of projects out there that are a solution looking for problems. You guys are solving a real world problem. I think there is a tremendous amount of potential with the Dabba network. As we close out here, is there anything that we haven't touched on? Any final thoughts that you have for people watching?
I think we're taking a step back and seeing that sometimes genuinely there's a rare chance to do something that's useful on multiple levels. Um, every single study shows the dramatic impact that bringing connectivity has to somebody's life, whether it's them getting an education, being able to work from home, access to relatives, medical care, things along those lines. And the second more useful thing is also every single study shows that I think a 1% improvement in connectivity effectively increases GDP of that country by 1% as well, or something like that. The stat is amazing. And it's a rare chance to do something that is both useful and self-sustaining and generates general, like actual value. So please consider taking a look at the Dabba network. We hope you will find interesting what we do.
Perfect. I think in my overview video that I put out, I predicted there would be case studies written about your project and the things that you have been able to accomplish. I think it's going to happen. I do think it's going to happen.
Yeah,
well,
knock on wood.
Look, Karam, thank you so much for joining. This was an awesome discussion. I think for anyone watching, they probably learned a lot. And absolutely, take a look at Dabba Network. There's a lot of different places that you can learn more about the project as we just spoke about. And if you want to, I'm going to put my referral link below. There's several different campaigns they're running. Feel free to use that if you want to get a hotspot. But again, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me.